All right, and I think we are live here. So I think let's, before we dive in too deep, let's give everyone a second to join, get some folks setting up their streams. In the meantime, while everyone's coming in, why don't everyone share where they're viewing from in the chat here? All right, looks like we got over 100 people in here already. So I think we can get started. So yeah, to kick it off, I'm Daniel from Start Engine. I work on the marketing team, and I'll be hosting today's webinar with Charles Yeomans, CEO of Atombeam, and Mr. Wonderful, or Kevin O'Leary, as many of you know him, who is a renowned entrepreneur, investor, and spokesperson for Start Engine. So Charles, if you want to briefly introduce yourself.
Sure. Yeah. So Charles Yeomans, yes, and the CEO of Atombeam and a co-founder, and we, we're doing well. We're using Start Engine's site right now, and I think nationally, in terms of active crowdfunding rates for operating companies, we're the top raiser, and so we're excited to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity to have Kevin interview me.
Awesome. And Mr. Wonderful, I'm not sure you need any introduction here. So just wanted to go over today's, we're going to be discussing Atombeam's plans and traction leading into 2025. This is the second webinar we are hosting together. And just as a reminder for everyone, there is just a few days left to be investing in Atombeam's equity crowdfunding campaign. It closes on January 30th. And the last campaign oversubscribed by more than $3 million. There's just a couple million left in this current round, so you don't want to miss your opportunity. So yeah, let's dive right into it here. And Charles, I'll let you kick it off. What are the key milestones and goals that Atombeam is looking for in 2025?
Right. Yeah. So in 2024, we were kind of getting a lot of our infrastructure in place and hiring engineers and moving our product, our first product, the NERPAC product, into kind of really being a real product that was enterprise ready, that we could show to a major company and they wouldn't have any issues dealing with it. And we're there. And so, and also to make another point too, it is now in a cloud service. So software as a service is the core offering that we have right now. That is where IoT can use it most, because it's remote things sending data to the cloud. In 2025, what we really want to do is move into data centers where we see a huge opportunity. Basically, if you look at what we do, we make data more informationally dense, and not by a lot, by a factor of 4. And just by virtue of that alone, if a data center can work with a quarter of the data it was, then we can make those data centers far more robust and reduce the amount of power they're using and a lot of other things. And we have a lot of patents around all this, and there's work that's getting going in it. But the focus to now has been on getting our SaaS product and getting our product really in good shape. And now we're ready to start focusing on the data center side of things, where we see, that's the mega upside.
That's awesome. And Mr. Wonderful, I know, even before we hopped on here, you were beginning to discuss data centers and your excitement about them. Going into this year, as an investor, what are you looking for in tech companies? And, what do you see in Atombeam from your previous discussion with Charles and our team, and, looking forward to that 2025 roadmap?
Well, Charles couldn't be in a hotter sector right now. It's getting the fastest velocity of capital I've ever seen for any sector. Announcements every day, 500 billion here, 70 billion there. It's an AI race. That's what's going on right now. And what determines success in AI is compute power. Chinese are beating us right now in building out data centers. The DOJ know that. They have massive facilities in Mongolia powered by coal burning plants. And so they're not concerned about environmental impact when it comes to AI because it's considered to be probably the most important weapon systems ever built. And so the demand to catch up in North America is extreme at the government, the state, the provincial level. They're doing it up in Canada as well. These are not cloud services. These are AI compute centers where you're training. You need massive capacity, and that unfortunately requires massive amounts of power. And so, above all of that, security is everything because you're dealing with models for DoD, DOJ, and CIA, and you name it. And they're just some of the tenants. You got to think about the other hyperscalers. So, it's an area that I, as an investor, obviously am focused on. I'm involved in developing these in West Virginia, North Dakota, and up in Alberta, Canada, with my partner Frank McCourt, and we are inundated with requests regarding when can we bring the capacity on, and where can we put it. So, if you think about Atombeam, it's SaaS. It's the infrastructure inside the center that matters, so that it can comply with all the stringent requirements. These are called 5-9 centers. It means they have to be up. They can only be down 26 seconds a month. And so they're really complex. They're $20 billion buildings for every gig. So you're building 1.4 gigs for 1 gig. You need some redundancy. But, just before we went live here, Charles and I were talking. It's just serendipitous. He's in the hottest sector in the world. I mean, and obviously I can understand why there'd be a lot of demand for what he's doing. And the other thing is the growth over 24, and just the amount of contracts the company signed. That's probably the most important endorsement, frankly.
Yeah, so you both touched on working with some larger companies that are already producing large sets of data and these data centers. Charles, do you have any partnerships lined up, whether it's with data centers or companies that are needing to process their own data or compact it? And, you talked about how in 2024, a lot of your work was about proving to these companies that, hey, we have this technology. So in 2025, are you going to be focused on continuing to do more of that, or actually launching some of these contracts and technology, in real time?
Right. Yeah. So, up to now, I mean, our focus, as I mentioned, has been on, we got to get the product super solid. We're talking about the most important data that big companies have, use, access, need. We can't mess around. It's got to be super solid, easy to use. That has been accomplished now. So now in the partnerships that we've built, like two of the key ones that are very active right now are Ericsson and Viasat, because they are both dealing with a lot of IoT type stuff. We're evolving now. We do have partnerships with Intel and with NVIDIA, and we anticipate those and some other new ones that we're working on right now with some other major companies. We have a partnership, for example, with HPE. HPE is a major supplier to data centers of all the equipment that goes into them. They are most. I can't like talk about everything, but I can tell you that it's a very much on our minds, and it's very much of interest to a lot of these companies that make either the chips or the boxes that go into data centers, and also the pipes. And if you were to, for example, look at, like there was an article in the Wall Street Journal a couple of months ago. No, actually last month. It was basically, what is the constraint now for the speed of data centers for AI? And yes, it's power, but it's also how you move the data around. And so we're getting inquiries from some of the biggest chip companies in the world. How can we, or can we, and we can, move data faster between chips? And that is a huge constraint right now. And also all the other things around the data center. There's data replication that moves data from one data center to another to back it up. There's tons of data that moves around in the data centers, and all that uses power and all that uses capacity. And all that turns into a big constraint in the speed and power effectiveness, power quality of a data center. So we have the capability of improving that. Now, that's going to take a lot of focus. It's going to be money, but a lot of what we've done last year rather, is build the team. And now we've got a really A+ team. And now we just fundamentally need to execute.
That's great. And yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of big partnerships and a lot of big problems we're solving. Mr. Wonderful, I guess another question for you would be, you see a lot of these problems. You've already discussed a few of them, but for you, are there any challenges that your companies and your portfolio are facing specific to these data challenges, whether it's, actually storing the data or moving it? What are you feeling the most impact with here?
It's really about speed and security. These both have to move forward at the same time. We're constantly working with the new NVIDIA chipsets, so the cost of refurbishment, which used to be every 4 years, is now every 18 months. And so in a typical data center, that's a $2 billion investment let's call it every 24 months, just to keep that up at the highest level of compute power for learning. But there's so much concern about security on these language models, and every time you try and enhance speed, it can't be at the compromise of security. And so the concerns now is, what's the most efficient way to provide security that doesn't slow down the ability of the stacks? It's really complex, and Atombeam seems to be in that metric. It's part of the solution. You're really trying to figure out how to do those two things at the same time. Remember, this is an industry probably in the second inning right now, but it's unique to, there's a different problem. The amount of capital required to be competitive is so huge that, you're hearing these announcements from Microsoft, 40 billion, Google, 30 billion. How many companies can afford that? And the basic reason for it is to build a data center that it's 20 billion bucks. That's just for 1 gig. And you make an investment like that. And by the way, 45% of data center compute right now is near Langley. It's all, people never looked at this model. It was all Virginia. Now it's moving to West Virginia because you can't get permits for redundant power. So, there's a lot of hype and people are using ChatGPT, but the real money being invested is partly through government support, government programs to catch up with the Chinese. We're in an economic war with China right now. I think people have figured that out. We hope it doesn't turn into a military war, but if it does, the guy with the best AI wins, period. And that's why, one way or another, this capital is going to get spent. It's like a locomotive train ripping down, and Atombeam's part of the SAS. It's so early that any solution that shows traction in either security or speed, or any way to compress data, any way to make it use less compute power or space, is very valuable.
Yeah, let me mention two quick things as an addendum. One is that we have a mathematical proof that's going to be published in an IEEE publication probably this quarter. It's in peer review. That at the same time, it's reducing the size of the data by roughly 3/4. It also can encrypt. And it's basically, and it's a standard kind of, AES encryption that can be accomplished in the same super light, super fast way. And it gets the data almost as small. So if it was 75%, maybe it's 73 or 72%. So that, we think, could be a huge deal because that'll work on a 10-cent chip. The other big thing to mention is we're doing work in Gen AI ourselves, and because if you think about what is going on with the big LLM, is it's using language. It's not using the most efficient thing. efficient way of approaching it, which is what we believe is our code words. The code words represent big chunks of data and with small chunks. And the consequence of being able to substitute code words for language has all kinds of implications. But one of those is we think that we can save probably something along the lines of 50% of the amount of training time to train a model. And that's a huge problem, right? Because it takes months and it costs, ChatGPT 5 is supposed to be billions. And we think we can reduce it by basically half.
That's great. And I know we've touched on AI quite a bit here. Charles, from my understanding, Atombeam was around before the ChatGPT craze and before the large language model craze that
right.
Obviously was around before it went public, but now everyone has their hands on it. What has changed within Atombeam, whether it's the technology or your vision or direction, since AI became this massive craze that everyone wants to be part of?
Right. So when we started this, the real thought was, pretty quickly we decided the thing to chase is IoT. IoT was a big thing and it was getting bigger. And the problem in IoT by a long shot is, well, it's two things. One, 98% of it has no security, and we automatically put security in. And the second big issue is you can't reduce the size using compression of these little messages that IoT gadgets generate. And it's too small for compression to work. And so we do both those things. And so that's what we initially focused on. But now with all the stuff with AI, we figured out that one of the key things about our stuff is the fact that you can randomly access and search an entire data lake, which you can't do with compressed data, but you can with our NERPAC compacted data. And so we're really talking about a remake of how data works right from the very edge. Now it's smaller, now it's encrypted into the data center. You don't compress it, you don't do anything, you just store it. And now it's all randomly accessible and usable. So you're eliminating the need to encrypt, decrypt, compress, and decompress. It's all usable as it is. It's a huge change in how the whole ecosystem could work.
That's great. And Mr. Wonderful, is that kind of what you're seeing as well? Where do you see AI going? That's kind of where it was and now where we are today. Where do you see it over the next year, 2 years, 5 years in this industry?
I think the growth rates will remain north of 30% annually for the next 5 years, and pretty well any service provider that can add any kind of efficiency, whether it be compression. The idea of being able to compress and not decompress and still be secure is a huge idea. And so that's going to be pursued. It's all about efficiency, and the capital expenditures are so huge that when you save 2% or 4%, it's hundreds of millions of dollars. It's huge. And so, all of this will be tested. Atombeam will be put on the front line with much of the hyperscalers to test all this stuff, which they're doing with any SaaS right now. But if it proves to be able to scale, it'll be huge. I mean, it'll be absolutely huge, because when we sit down, we design to build these things, and so we meet with their engineers, and remarkably, it's such a small universe. Outside of military, there's only 7 companies that are the tenants for all of these giant facilities. So, Charles his mandate is to go talk to the 7 amigos and get them looking at this. But the application fits beyond just that. I mean, security, compression, capital reduction, all that stuff. That's what fits here. And of course, it's second inning. It's a hell of a sector. I've never in my career seen so much capital momentum in such a small period of time, including the internet crazy stuff back in the 90s, the pets.com and all that crap. This tech is completely different because it's so important for national security.
Awesome. And I know, so we've had a few questions that we started with here, but the crowd has, a few questions themselves. We got a couple hundred people in here watching us. So let's start. We got a question from Kai. This one's for Charles mainly, but Kevin, as an operator of many companies, you might have insight into this as well. Charles, how are you crafting your software internally? Are you using AI as well, or are you really focused on, developing it in a traditional sense of, manpower and writing code manually?
It's both. I mean, you can't rely entirely on AI. Like something like, I think now software development is roughly a third done by AI versus humans. It's a matter of like, you can do builds a lot faster with AI, but you still have to have humans testing and thinking through the architecting and how you make that fit to this, and everything has to work, etc. So it may be one day everything is done by AI, but right now, no. I mean, it's a combination, and the same is true for us. And I will tell you too that taking a prototype and turning it into a product, that is a heavy lift. That's the deal. I mean, because there's lots of prototypes floating around out there that are good ideas, but you know, Chevron is not going to say, "Sure, take that prototype and put it on my stuff." No, it's got to be a real, honest to God product, which takes professionals who really know what they're doing with this stuff.
It's like I think Kevin said earlier, it's still the second inning, so I'm sure there's going to be a lot of development and improvement along the way with those AI development tools. So this next question will be for both of you as well. Charles, how long is this funding round going to last you, and where do you see it taking you? And Kevin, on your side, when you're looking at investment opportunities, what type of runway are you looking for when you're making investments? You say, hey, I'm going to give you $5 million, $10 million, $20 million. How long do you expect that to last for founders and for companies? And of course, maybe it'll vary by industry.
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing this for 25 years. I have very simple metrics on this. If you're doing a venture startup, which generally, those are the most nascent companies, you're looking for, if you're lucky, 30% success rate. The national average is right now about 20, but there have been better years. And so you know whether the business model is going to work after 36 months. The exit generally takes 5 to 7 years, but your biggest hurdle is your risk is reduced after 36 months. If they figured out their customer acquisition costs and they're flatlining it on cash flow, or even better still, positive on cash flow, that company is going to be worth something, 24 to 36 months later. And that's pretty well how it's gone since the beginning of time in venture capital. So I usually have a pretty good sense within a year if we have to change the management or something. But generally, you got to have a 5 to 7 year window. And the winners are such extraordinary outcomes that they pay for all the losers. So if you get in a batch of deals, vintage 2025, and you get 2 of them 1,000x, you don't care about the other 8 dead ones. And so your job in making investments is to get some diversification, look for growth in the beginning, not necessarily profitability, growth, any way you want to measure it. And growth generally leads to profitability because, as long as the executional skills of the management team understand how to go through each phase, and you're obviously getting that sense from Charles. Great ideas are a dime a dozen. Executional skills are really, really, really hard to find.
Yes, indeed.
And so you either listen to Charles and say this guy can execute, or you don't. Because if he doesn't execute, they'll take him behind the barn and shoot him. He's raised so much money.
Exactly.
So,
Yep, which would be appropriate. I'd be okay with it.
So I think he's a good bet.
Thanks. So I look, I mean, in terms of answering the how long we have, it's really dependent a lot on how much revenue do we get. Absent any revenue except for those contracts we have, then okay, it's a little over a year, but I certainly expect that we're going to start banging in some serious revenue here this year, and probably in this quarter, at least really starting to roll. We also have a ton of activity with DoD, and I think that our federal experience, I mean, we have a dedicated federal team, that federal experience is going to help us with some of the stuff that Kevin was addressing, which is this is a national priority to do something to catch up in AI. It's a, you know, they're announcing new stuff all the time in terms of like the new administration and putting more, you know, hundreds of billions into catching up in AI. It's got to be done. And if we can come in there and show the right people, hey, we can quadruple the efficiency of a data center, that's going to get interest. And that will help us, you know, knock out some more revenue on the government side. That's my point. And we know how to do that. We're set up, you know, it's not a minor point to be set up to work with the government.
Great. And I know we're coming up on time, so just a couple more questions here. We have one from Linda. So what is the difference between data compression and data compaction? And what is the difference in terms of the storage requirements and data loss as well?
Okay, so really quickly, so compression works on individual files. So it looks at a file and says, okay, here's a pattern that's matched by that same pattern over here on the same file. I'm going to put a little placeholder in the second place and say, when you reinflate this file back to where it was, take this pattern here and put it over here. And so every file's done individually differently, right? And so what we do instead is we swap out the entire contents of a file for code words. And the code words are out of a code book. And the code book has a bunch of little code words, which might be 3 bits or 5 bits or 10 bits. And they're matched up to patterns that we find in a data sample that's representative of that kind of data. So you might see, you know, like a bunch of these, you know, you might have thousands of these little combinations in a code book. And when you swap it out, you have reduced the size of the file, usually on average about 75%. And so you might have a similar reduction with a compression, but you won't have that when you're talking about really, really small datagrams, because if you think about what compression is doing, it's looking for repetitions of pattern, but if there's hardly any data to work with, it isn't going to work. And so nobody uses, or very rarely do people use compression on really small data that is generally the kind of datagrams that a IOT, a gadget like a temperature sensor or a machine or something gets generated. So that's a big differentiation. That is a fundamental difference between what we do in compression. And in terms of how much reduction we get, it's comparable. It's usually about the same, sometimes a little less than compression would get for a large file. For really small files, you might even, if you're using compression, because it adds in a header on top of it, it doesn't find much repetition. It might, very often in a small datagram, it'll make it bigger rather than smaller. So the net is, it's apples and oranges. It's, you know, you can't really compare them.
Yeah, that was great. Very helpful, especially for a non-native techie like myself. That was very helpful, and I'm sure for the crowd as well. Kevin, one last question for you. So for all these people watching, for people who might watch later, anyone else considering Atombeam as an investment, what is your advice when speaking to prospective investors, whether it be in Atombeam or, you know, another AI company or software company?
You know, really, you have, with AI, it's a longer term investment because you're trying to catch the growth wave. Really, the most important thing is to listen to the communications as a shareholder from the company on a quarterly basis. What milestones have been met, what have been missed, what trends are emerging. In most cases, the executives have to be able to pivot because they have to read the room in terms of what clients want in AI, what trends emerge, and then make sure the company's tech is able to maneuver into a desirable position, because a lot of it's SaaS. I mean, it's, you know, there's kind of good news and good news. One is, it's not like social media where you're trying to acquire 1 million eyeballs. You're trying to work with 7 to 10 giant companies that once you get one of them, word of mouth happens pretty damn fast. And that's the case here. And so once it becomes a standard stack, or gets standardized somewhere in the stack, you get hypergrowth. That's what you're looking for, because it solves a solution, whether it be the compression or the security or whatever it is, the combination of both, the reduction in capital spent. And once a giant hyperscaler or a giant client uses it and trains their team on it, that's when things start to happen. And that's the way investors look at this. So you're betting on the tech and the jockey and the team around. And one way to measure success is because you look at the momentum of capital raise. I mean, he hasn't had a hard time raising money. So that's a really good thing in today's market. It's extremely selective, very, very selective on which companies at his stage get funded. And it's a massive endorsement to the model when, savvy investors put up money. That's the whole idea, because they're not looking for it tomorrow. They don't look for it to return tomorrow, but the growth is so crazy in this space. It's just, that's I think a good answer for why you probably want to consider this deal if you're interested in exposure to AI. And I have a rule. You look at I don't put more than 20% in any one sector, but the fastest growing sector, and every time anybody even considers it to be called out, it does another leap up, because it's real. It's heavily supported by government mandate in every country. And if anybody out there is using it right now all of my 54 companies now, we all use AI in one way or another. A lot of it has to do with customer acquisition, advertising, or measuring. For example, in our wine business, we forecast weather for crops like Moscato versus Pinot, so that we know how much juice we will or won't have in 9 months, and it's remarkably accurate. So all of this stuff is going into all 11 sectors. So does Charles have something that fits in AI? Yeah, it looks like it. And that's why it's interesting.
That's great. And Charles, before we finish with some closing remarks here, are there any upcoming projects or campaigns or opportunities that you want investors or prospective investors to know about?
Yeah, I think the big thing for us is, as Kevin said last time we spoke, it's about execution. We've got the opportunity, and it's crystal clear. And so for us, it's about keeping our heads down and keeping focus on the things that we can do, that there's stuff on the truck that we can sell today, and that's most of the IoT stuff. But it's also how well can we, and this is my mandate, this is what I'm doing, and this is what everybody's responsibility in my team is about, is turning it into something that can address where the big kahuna is, which is in data centers, AI. That's where we think we can turn this into a unicorn. So that's what we're about this year. And part of it is going to be, work on the actual products. Part of it's going to be instantiation and chips, which has to get going, which is a big, expensive process. But if you're going to be in this sector, you got to have some really sharp people who are executing. And that's the difference between us, and that's the difference between a success and a failure. Because there's tons of good ideas, but execution is the thing that we have to make happen. And I think we've got the right people.
That's great. Well, Kevin, Charles, I want to thank you both for joining us today and having this great conversation. For everyone watching and everyone that'll be watching later, I want to remind you that there's just 7 days left to invest in Atombeam's campaign on Start Engine. So the campaign will close on January 30th at 11:59 p.m. Pacific time. So head to view the chat. There's links there where you can find the campaign, make your investment, learn more. You can also head to the campaign page and ask Charles additional questions where he'll be able to respond if you didn't get them answered today. So I want to thank everyone again for joining, and Charles and Kevin, thank you both again.
Yep. Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much, Kevin. Thanks, Daniel.
Right. Bye-bye.
Bye.